Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Sobia. I'm just gonna now join in from my um, own IP.
ठीक.
Just
Nazir Sakum.
Walaikum Salam. Just setting
Okay, I'm
up.
on. Yeah. So we'll start when we start, right?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Malik Saab. This is Sobia.
Hi, Sophia. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And
I'm sorry I missed your earlier webinar. I wasn't in the country. And doing it from North America didn't sound very feasible because of the time difference. But I hear it went off really well.
yes, it was a roaring success, and the next one is going to be bigger, better, sexier. So
Acha.
you have to be there for that.
Inshallah, inshallah, I will be there.
But thank you very much for your support, because I do recognize that we started this conversation way back when, and it's finalized now. But indeed, it's a pleasure and a privilege to work with partners like yourself and Nazish and Anas. So thank you very much.
Oh, great. And we hope to continue doing that.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Oh, Malik Sab, I just wanted to let you know that Christian will be in Karachi towards the end of September.
Okay.
Mhm.
Acha, ठीक है. End of September, meaning what
20th.
dates?
And the 27th through the 29th of September. So I'm trying to squeeze time in his calendar for a Race to Zero related meeting, because I think for a one-on-one meeting, he might not have that much stretch.
ठीक है. Okay, no, that's good. So let us know how that goes.
I will, Ji. I will. Thanks very much.
Kulsum Sanikum.
Walaikum salam. How are you?
I'm good. I'm back here.
That's good.
I mean, just for everybody else's consumption, Kulsum was very kind to host us in Washington about, what, 2 weeks ago? And so thank you very much. And we've woken you up a bit early today. Or is this your normal time?
No, this is, I wake up very early. So this is actually very kind of you to give me such a nice time, to have it at such a nice time. Thank you.
Great, great. Okay, I think we're just waiting for everybody else to come on board, and then Nazis will take over.
Okay, great.
Morning, Dr. Kulsum. Have you met Sobia Becker?
No, I don't believe I have.
Sobia, if you'd like to introduce yourself, Dr. Kulsum is a very old friend of SERB, like you are, but she's been helping SERB since I think the time SERB started. I think she did the first awareness session for us. And Sobia, Dr. Kulsum has been helping us in areas related to climate change, and we've had her on a number of webinars with us to speak about climate change and this impact on Pakistan. And now we're working with her with the British High Commission on the Race to Zero, build up to Race to Zero, basically, and the COP26.
Kulsum, it's great to meet you. And I read the report, and I think that you've landed some very important information in a very concise and clear manner. So it was quite a treat to read that. And it also links directly with the work that we are doing.
Let me interrupt you on the report. Let's be absolutely clear. This is all the hard work of SERB, Nazish and her colleagues. They're the ones who wrote it. And I'm extremely proud of the excellent report they've written too.
No, I beg your pardon. Then Nazish, all kudos to you. But it's the bottom line is that it's a great report, something that all the authors of this document can be proud of.
I
Mhm.
think so too. Well said, Sobia.
So I think while we're waiting for the others, hope this seems to be a sort of action-packed session. I hope it goes well, because there are a lot of speakers, and hopefully we do manage the time well as well. And it's very important that we get all the material across, and we've been quite lucky that we managed to connect to the ADB in time. And Mr. Waqar Zakaria, he's basically worked on the Pakistan Action Plan with the Ministry of Climate Change, and he'll be presenting on that as well.
That's great.
Mhm. So, and we are having rains in Pakistan, in Karachi, in fact, all over Pakistan as well. But in Karachi, the net seems to suddenly become hyperactive when the rains just show themselves. So I hope that everybody can join in.
I'm looking forward to the discussion too. I really hope there is a good time for Q&A, because I
Mhm.
think that will be really interesting to see how people perceive, what's in the report and what's been said.
Nazish, how many
Well, we had, the last we checked, there were around 70 registrations. So
That's healthy.
hopefully, and what we did was we tried to reach out to
Hey, Anas.
a lot of the international development organizations as well.
So we're just waiting for others to join in.
Anas, can you try the presentations out? Just in,
Yeah, sure. So this is ours. And I think this is,
This is me.
yeah.
Very dramatic.
I think it works
Hmm.
very well. Okay, this is working. I'm just gonna check Waqar Zakaria's. That's his. Okay. Presentations work.
So the magic word is next every time?
Yeah. So yeah.
So Rafe has joined us, and we've got Davar as well now. So we're just waiting on Interloop, and
It's live.
yeah. So let's just start, and hopefully they'll join in. I'm just messaging pause, and then we'll start. Anas, will you start the webinar? Hello, everyone. Let's just wait for everyone to join in, and then we'll start the webinar. Assalamu alaikum, Waqar Sahab, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, and pause.
Yes, Nazish, I'm here.
Okay, all right. If you could all mute your mics, so. I think I'm going to start. Everybody will join in. Hello, everyone. We're very excited to host this webinar today. It's on a topic that has become very important to Pakistan. And just a few housekeeping rules. We will be having a Q&A towards the end of the webinar. If you could type your question in the chat box, and we will ensure that they are answered towards the end of the webinar. So a little bit about ourselves. I'm Nazish Sheikha. I work at the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business, which is an initiative of the Pakistan Business Council. And what we do is we research in practices which lead to sustainable value creation. One area that we've been looking at is environmental stewardship. And in environmental stewardship, air quality has become an important issue. So and we've been looking at this in this area since 2016, and we all realize, I think all of us at the webinar realize, especially when winter comes, on how poor air quality does affect us, especially in the landlocked regions of Punjab, where I'm based in Karachi, and even in Karachi, air quality does seem to get pretty bad during the winter. I'm sure a lot of you do know that in Pakistan has a very poor air quality, and in 2020, the average air quality for metric for Pakistan was 153. So in WHO terms, this is qualified as being unhealthy, and unhealthy air has an impact on the health of employees, on the local communities, and also on infrastructure with buildings and these sort of things being affected as well. So today we're very excited to present the findings of the report that we did on air quality. We collected data in early 2019 from the business sector in Pakistan, and we basically been looking at how this relates to the various aspects, or how we can connect it to Pakistan, the regulatory impact in Pakistan and other things as well. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Anas Mifta to introduce what we've done. And then after that, we have a very high-level panel of experts to talk a little more about the various aspects we've covered in air quality.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anas Mifta. I work as Program Manager Sustainability at the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business. We've been working on air quality for a while, and it's one of our main areas of focus in the last 2 years and also going forward. CERB, as a lot of you are aware, has a certain strategic goals that it works towards: environmental stewardship, sustainable systems, transforming business culture, gender equality, ethical practices, and creating livelihoods. We've been engaged with several knowledge partners and have done several case studies, surveys, and roundtables over our period of establishment. And now we're going to talk about the area in focus. Air quality in Pakistan is an issue that has increased in significance over the last 2 or 3 years, especially with the smog situation worsening during the winter months across Punjab and across the Indus Plain. Air quality in Pakistan, as my colleague Nazir Sheikha mentioned, the average quality index rates Pakistan at 153, which is characterized as unhealthy. This was the average figure for 2020, and in many of the largest cities in Pakistan, such as Lahore, Faisalabad, the AQI index deteriorates significantly. A study was conducted by Pakistan EPA with the assistance of GICA revealed that inhalable suspended particulate matter was 10 times greater than the WHO specified limit, which in itself is a harrowing statistic. In addition to it, several researchers have put up the economic cost of air pollution, estimating a figure close to 365 billion rupees per annum in different economic costs. Keeping all of this in mind, CERB conducted a questionnaire survey conducted in 2019 with the view of analyzing how the private sector is concerned with air quality management. In 2020, CERB combined this with how policies related to ESG have changed following the COVID-19 with specific focus on air quality. The survey findings revealed some encouraging statistics relating to the private sector and air quality management in Pakistan, though it also did reveal severe areas that were lacking in policy and in implementation. In terms of responsibility, except for the banking and finance sector, there seems to be a practice across the board to use third parties for monitoring emissions. 90% of all respondents stated or have undertaken mitigating of various adaptive actions for various reasons. These reasons are clearly outlined in our report that was shared, that will be shared and will be available on SERV's website as well. 70% of the companies monitor emissions at the on-site energy source. Energy source is characterized as the chief source of emission in the private sector in Pakistan, according to our survey. 70% of all companies stated that they assess the quality and sulfur content of fuel in the process at their facility. Low quality fuel with high sulfur content is also considered as one of the main causes of worsening air pollution in our country and across the world as well, where regulations have not been able to keep up with the fuel standards. 60% of respondents stated that they monitor emissions within the factory boundary, and hence there is an obvious case that the private sector kind of suspends their responsibility beyond their boundary line, even though emissions do affect areas nearby and the population in those areas. Only 60% of companies analyze the emissions with background reading to determine the impact of factories on the air shed over time. Again, this is to ascertain my previous point in stating that it was revealed during our survey that the private sector does not engage in the responsibility of benchmarking the impact of air pollution on areas beyond their boundary line. Less than 40% of the companies report on scope 2 emissions. If people in the audience are not aware of what scope 2 entails, scope 2 emissions are characterized as emissions from energy sources or from energy imported. So only 40% of the companies report on those. Only 27% monitor emissions for vehicles used in the movement of goods, and only 30% monitor monitor emissions of vehicles that are used by employees of the organization. The last two can be characterized as scope 3 emissions. SERV's survey aimed to identify if the pandemic had increased priority on environmental issues, and while organizations were more inclined to work in energy efficiency and climate action, air quality still has not attained the level of significance that SERV's findings and research done beforehand believe it should have. Another important area that we found out was that fuel monitoring is done extensively in most organizations that were surveyed. That means that fuel consumption is actively recorded, but is done in terms of calculation in their finances. This can be easily adopted to do GHG emission calculation, and means that there is not a significant step that organizations have to take in order to move forward and improve their GHG emission quantification. The report entailed some recommendations for both the private sector and for the regulators present. We believe that for the private sector, the responsibility entails supporting data collection through the installation of air quality monitors in surrounding communities. Our corporate partner today, Interloop Limited, is ideally placed in that regard, since they have initiated such a program in the city of Faisalabad. We also believe that the private sector should be working in conjunction with the public sector to improve ambient air quality standards in the case that the current standards are out of date and not up to the current conditions prevalent. In addition to it, an important area that we recognized was the role of executive leadership in all ESG related matters, especially concerning air quality. Executive leadership can promulgate the adoption of policies and also mandate the necessary capital investment. Our report also highlights a growing international trend where executive pay is benchmarked to ESG indicators. For the regulators, we've identified inclusion of emission calculation in risk assessment as mandated in the green banking guidelines that were issued by the State Bank of Pakistan. Currently, the State Bank does not instruct banks or has any mandated criteria that the banks can use to quantify emissions in their lending practices or in their own operations as well. Financial incentives have to be designed by the regulators to promote quantification, as I mentioned before, and adoption of new mitigation technologies. For those of us who are aware, the government, the State Bank's renewable energy scheme, which allows subsidized loans for installation of renewable energy, is a perfect example of this case. And the last area that we focused on, and something that we believe is an area of immense significance as the corporate sector in Pakistan moves forward, is to improve the quality of our sustainability reporting. We realized through our surveys and through interviews conducted that as long as sustainability reporting is voluntary, there exists little incentive for large firms to improve sustainability reporting, except for external pressure. So our recommendations include making sustainability reporting involuntary for listed companies, whilst strengthening regulation and implementation of the current standards and laws that are present. Like I mentioned before, our air quality report will be available on SERB's website. It is easy to access, and I will be sharing the link with all the attendants that have registered for this webinar. Over to you, Nazish.
Thank you, Anas. So we do see that there is a lot to be done related to air quality. But we do need to start by understanding the basics of air quality. Is it a local issue? Is it a localized issue? Is it a larger issue? And what are the things that make it so difficult to address right now? So I'd like to introduce our first expert to talk about this. Dr. Kulsoom Ahmed is a global thought leader and practitioner in international development, climate, and environmental sustainability, with over 25 years of experience in providing policy analysis, advice, and development solutions to countries. She has worked at the World Bank for over 24 years, leading teams all across the world. Dr. Kulsoom, Assalamu alaikum. I would like you to begin with why you think air quality is an important issue, and what are the sources of bad air quality in your opinion?
Nazish and all the participants. Let me follow up in a sense on Anus's great start. Sources of bad air quality are really emissions of every type, whether it's from burning fuel or petrol or diesel or coal or oil or waste, agricultural or trash. They can also be from dust, and that can be from construction or from roads, unpaved roads, or from industries, things like cement plants, or even industrial emissions where there's been a chemical reaction of sort. And there are emissions from that. But what makes emissions move to being air quality is actually the weather, is meteorology. It's the rain, it's the humidity, and it's the wind. And some cities like Lahore have, the meteorology is such that they have what is called inversions. Even a little bit of pollution is held in place if you like, by the pattern of the winds and the humidity. In Karachi, yes, there's a sea breeze, but there are times when that breeze changes direction. So it's not just simply the emissions, but then how they move about in the atmosphere that creates the bad air quality. And then what makes it local? Let me just follow up to an earlier comment that was made, is actually the effect of these chemicals in the air on, I would say, primarily people's health. And this could be at the level of the workers or the community, or even a few miles out in terms of the broader community, or even sometimes hundreds of miles out in the even broader community. And the type of health effects we see, because the tiniest of particles, PM 2.5, which are particles which are less than 2.5 microns in size, lodge in the deepest part of our lungs, which means that when you take a breath, you can't actually take a full breath. So this, of course, causes respiratory illnesses and health effects. But in COVID, for example, they found, due to research done in the US and in India, that there's also reduced, if you like, or increased your vulnerability to the virus. So there are all sorts of health effects, primary and secondary. The World Health Organization says that deaths are actually caused by poor air quality, and those deaths are primarily strokes and lung cancer and cardiovascular diseases. So that gives you a sense of what these particles lodging in our lungs does for us. So that's in terms of health. You mentioned infrastructure. If you have chemicals dissolve in rainwater, that rainwater comes down. It's often called acid rain. And actually, it can deface buildings and construction, but equally, it can affect agricultural crops. And this is what we found in a lot of countries where yields went down massively because of acid rain coming down on agriculture. So all of this is what makes air quality local, because the emissions that come out of, whether it's the cars or whether it's the factories or whether it's from burning of trash, actually have an effect on people, on the physical environment that we've built, but as well as on nature.
Thank you, Dr. Kulsoom. And what about air? How can this be a risk to companies?
I would say at two different levels. One is just a risk in terms of reputation. I mean, I always think of companies, and companies view themselves as part of the community, part of the social fabric of a country. So if their emissions are affecting the health of the people in the factory, around them in the community, in the country, surely that is a reputational risk. What we're finding is that consumers are becoming also much more conscious of this. And you see this a lot in the export-oriented businesses, where consumers are demanding that companies look into the effect of this air pollution, or look into air pollution. So from being a reputational risk, it also becomes a financial risk for the company because of damage to a company's reputation at losing its clients. We are also seeing much more, at least on the international markets, a focus on ESG, environment, social governance, investors looking at what companies are doing on this front, and also putting money, investing in companies that are doing things on ESG. So in a sense, from a positive side too, it's an opportunity to build your, particularly a green export-oriented business, to appeal to those markets, but also to bring money from investors. It actually has become a the amount that ESG investors are putting into companies runs into the trillions of dollars. And this market has actually grown exponentially over the last 5 to 10 years.
Yes, that's true. I've read somewhere that the market is now more than $3 trillion. What about your experience with other countries? How are other countries managing air quality?
It depends on the country, because the first step is actually understanding what is causing the emissions and understanding where is the pollution coming from, and then doing something about it. So, I mean, if I go back to the 50s, actually, the 40s and the 50s, it was London that used to have these awful fogs, and thousands of people used to get killed, literally would die. One from breathing in the air, but even from accidents because cars couldn't see people and would run them over. And they actually came out with the first Clean Air Act. If you look at China in the last 15 years, China has done a massive amount in terms of air quality regulation. They have tackled it by putting in strict regulations, and that regulations then have determined what are the technologies that companies are using for power generation, but also for other in other industrial sectors. In Mexico City, it was all cars and fuel. So Mexico City focused on how they could change and improve the quality of their vehicle fleet, as well as improve the quality of the fuel. So it kind of depends. Each city is unique. And the public sector, together with the private sector, the community, really has to work together to understand what is causing the pollution and then tackle it.
Thank you, Dr. Kulsoom. I'd like to now move over to our next speaker, Mr. Ahmed Rafi Alam. Rafi is an environmental lawyer and partner at Salim Alam & Co. He's a Yale World Fellow and currently serves as Senior Advisor to Air Quality Asia and as a member of the Hisar Foundation think tank on the rational use of water. In the past, he has served on the boards of various utility companies. Rafi, would you like to switch on your mic? Video?
The host has stopped me from turning my video on, but otherwise I'm all set.
All right. Okay. So we'll do it from our end. I'd like to ask about what our survey results has shown. Our survey results have shown that most companies are complying with the current regulatory requirements. So if you could give us an overview of Pakistan's legislation on ambient air quality.
Thank you. It's a privilege being invited. Pakistan has an environment legislation which is now provincially enacted and enforced. That means all 4 provinces have their own environment legislation, and under them they have provincial environment quality standards. And for air quality, they have standards for 3 types of air emissions. We have quality standards for industrial gaseous emissions. These are the emissions from the factory chimneys, for example. Then we have quality standards for ambient air. That's the quality of the outside air that we breathe. And of course, industrial gaseous emissions and ambient air are linked. If you want to have better ambient air, your industrial gaseous emissions will have to be more stringent, and vice versa. Also, a third type of air quality regulation that we have is environmental quality standards for motor vehicle exhaust and noise. And these prescribe also the tailpipe exhaust for an automobile and also the fuel quality for automobiles, which is currently pegged at Park 2, which is somewhere close to Euro 2 standards. These environment quality standards for ambient air, for industrial gaseous emissions, and for automobiles, although now provincially enforced, have a history that go back before the 18th Amendment when these laws were national. What I'm trying to say is that many of these standards were set in the 1990s when ambient air quality was much better than today. And you'll find that in the industrial gaseous emissions quality standards, there are specific exemptions given to thermal power stations that operate on furnace oil. I believe this was part of the energy policy of Pakistan in the 1990s, and that's why these types of units are given slightly different emission standards as compared to other industrial units. Over and above these environmental quality standards, which I believe are outdated and need to be updated given the fact that our ambient air quality is now some of the worst in the world, we also have smart reporting requirements under our environmental laws, where different types of industries are required to submit either annual or biannual or quarterly reports, both for their liquid emissions and for their gaseous emissions. They're classified broadly as industrial sector industries, category A, which are supposed to give reports of their emissions, things like glass manufacturing, fertilizer companies, petroleum companies, thermal power plants. They're supposed to provide a certain type of reporting. And then the other category of smart reporting that is required by industry is category B, which seems to do more with the food processing, where industries such as sugar, textile, the dairy industry, fruits and vegetables, metal finishing is all part of the requirements there as well. So this is the regime that we have. We have standards for emissions, for both outside air quality and for industrial gaseous emissions, which are outdated. We have vehicle emissions, which are hardly enforced. And we have fuel standards where Pakistan's sulfur content in its petrol is some of the worst in the world. And the smart reporting legislation is scarcely complied with.
All right. So it seems that our regulatory regulation is quite far behind, and whatever is there is little compliance. So how about the air quality standards? How do they compare to the WHO guidelines? Are we because these were set in 2016, I think, after the devolution of the Pakistan Environmental Protection Act. So are they in line what the global requirements are?
Well, I should point out that the WHO air quality guidelines are not enforceable around the world. They are indicative guidelines that sort of provide the best science on what the health impacts of different types of pollutants are, and then recommend to countries in the world, to industries in the world, what sorts of emissions or what levels of emissions they should have. Mm-hmm. Now, in comparison to the in other words, countries are free to set their own ambient air standards and their own industrial standards, and indeed their own motor vehicle standards. And we have done that in Pakistan as well. But for instance, take PM 2.5, the WHO standard for either 24 hours or 1 hour average, I'm not sure, but let's take it as an example, is set at 10 micrograms per cubic meter. In Pakistan, it's 15, which if you look at it is a significant percentage increase. But if you cross the border into India, the PM 2.5 ambient level is closer to 60. Now, you mentioned the devolution. I should point out that we used to have national standards that have now become provincial standards. In other words, all 4 provinces have their own provincial air quality standards. They are uniform, except for the instance of Sindh. In the last few years, Sindh has changed its requirements for the ambient air standard for PM 2.5. It's actually increased them to about 50 or 60 micrograms per cubic meter, as opposed to the WHO standard of 10. Now, there are many reasons for doing so. One of them is the fact that the large tracts of Sindh under desert, the Thar Desert, have a background dust which is so high that if you did any industrial activity over there, it would throw it over the PM 2.5 levels. So there are all sorts of technical sort of arguments for having higher or lower standards than the WHO. And in Pakistan, we do have standards that differ from the WHO. They're a little bit more lenient. But as I said, our standards were set a long time ago, and although they've been adopted by the provinces, there is room to improve them or refine them. That said, it's an incredibly technically and politically fraught exercise to do so.
Okay, all right, thank you. And what about the private sector? How can the private sector at present face any potential legal risks for complying with the present air quality standards, for not complying with them, or for even though they're complying, there's still an adverse effect of that?
Well, if they're complying, you see, the standards were set a long time ago for the industrial gaseous emissions. And as I said, certain exceptions were given to the furnace oil thermal plants that were supplying us energy as well. So indeed, a lot of air pollution has taken place since. And one could consider that the relative amount of space or give in the airshed is no longer present anymore. We need to make our industrial gaseous emissions more stringent so that the ambient air can improve. But of course, doing so would require industry across the board to change its processes and to adapt various types of air control technologies, which would be a costly process as well. So as I said, changing standards does have real and very difficult political and technical repercussions because of the costs associated with it. That said, the improvements, or sorry, the benefits of having clean air, if quantified, far outweigh the capital cost of investing in tailpipe technologies that improve air emissions in the long term.
Okay, thank you. So I guess it's better to show stewardship beforehand. Our paper also highlighted that only a few companies are creating the link between air quality and climate change. So for that, I would like to invite Sobia Becker to tell us more about the air quality climate nexus. A little bit about Sobia Becker. Sobia's expertise lies in the climate, energy, sustainable development nexus, in creating partnerships and platforms for action, and in driving favorable outcomes through policy and programmatic interventions. And Sobia has led initiatives in climate risk management, and she works with both public and private sectors in developing cohesive frameworks for climate action. Sobia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nazish. As always, it's a pleasure to join SERB and certainly the esteemed panelists we have today in talking about the importance of business stewardship, environmental stewardship. And if I may have my presentation, please. What really resonated with me was what Ahmed Rafi was just referring to. Nobody has really looked carefully at the externalities related to the whole air pollution issue. And I think moving forward, that's going to be something that is critical, also from a climate perspective, from a public health perspective, and looking at the far-reaching impacts that air pollution would have across all spheres of life, that would be important. So just waiting for my slides to come on. I see the IT gremlins got their way. Excellent. I was very, very struck by an article that I read a little while ago, and it referred to bad ambient air quality, where one of the persons interviewed had actually compared that to breathing in poison. And indeed, if we look at the extremely negative health impacts of air pollution, then I think it is akin to breathing in poison, which is why your report is so timely. It sets out all of the issues with a great degree of clarity. And this is something that we really need to work towards, especially as awareness about business action as far as environmental and climate issues goes. Next, please. The two pictures that you would have before you show you just how thick and enveloping Lahore's fog can be. And at the height of fog season, when a lot of activity almost comes to a halt, and this is like a city that never sleeps. So when Lahore comes almost to a halt because of air pollution and the fact that visibility is reduced to just a few meters, you can imagine what sort of social and economic costs that can that exacts. So with apologies, or for my Punjabi accent, to the singer Tafu, who sang famously about Lahore, Lahore, when visibility decreases so much, and the fact that you can hardly see anything in Lahore, then I think the silver lining to that cloud, in a very ironic manner of speaking, is going to be perhaps the birth rate is going down because thank you. Next. Over the last 2 decades, there's been a growth spurt. There has been a lot of expansion. However, unfortunately, a lot of that growth, particularly related to urban planning, as well as the expansion of urban and peri-urban areas, the fact that a lot of polluting industry either ended up in residential areas or residential areas sprung up around industrial areas, has all led to a certain and unplanned and unbridled growth, which is perhaps, I won't be too wrong in saying that it would be hard to course correct. The growth, the economic growth, the growth in population has led to an exploitation and an overexploitation of both the natural resources, the environment that we live in, as well as the systems that we rely on. And with the result that we're looking at a high degree of pollution that can be attributed to domestic factors, to transport, as the colleagues already have mentioned, the fuel standards and so, and but mostly on account of industrial/commercial activity. For the purposes of our discussion today, I'm going to limit my comments to the to industrial air pollution, which is one of the leading causes of suspended particulate matter, as well as greenhouse gas emissions, specifically the nitrous oxides, the carbon monoxide and dioxides, methane, the sulfur oxides, as well as gases that you would use in air conditioning, cooling, etc. Nitrous oxides and the sulfates are amongst the biggest stressors as far as greenhouse gases go. Methane has a global warming potential that is much higher than even carbon dioxide. So you can imagine if these continue to go unchecked, what sort of tremendous consequences related to ill health as well as shrinking economic activity we are going to be faced with. Next, please. Air pollution and climate change is, unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle, and it's also a mutually reinforcing cycle. So when the concentrations of suspended particulate matter, and this also includes black carbon, as well as the greenhouse gases that I had mentioned, increase, there's an adverse impact on also the microclimate of the region where this is happening. So the immediate effects will be felt in the area where pollution is highest, but it will also spread. I will come to dispersion later, but just to say that higher concentrations of suspended particulate matter as well as greenhouse gases all lead to higher temperatures. So we have hotter summers and milder winters. It leads to a decrease in productivity, which in turn means that yields, and here I refer specifically to agricultural yields, which are obviously a source of food as well as one of the primary production inputs that our industry needs. And it also results to lowered health outcomes. And it's very interesting that the Smog Commission took note of the fact that higher air pollution in Lahore is actually responsible for reducing life expectancy of an average citizen by about 3 years. So when we talk about industry and why it's important for industry to act, then some of the potent risks that will impact industry will be their ability to produce, because obviously productivity is going down. There's going to be an unreliability of natural resources that they would need, and this also includes water. This in turn will generate their profit margins and their ability to create greater shareholder value. So this will result in an uncertain operating environment. The ability of production, the availability, pardon me, of production inputs, supply chain issues, which will be affected by changing weather patterns, increasing temperatures, etc. And very importantly, the health of your workforce. So OSHA issues are going to come up. Next, please. We don't have a lot of time, and we need to take affirmative climate action now. And this we can do only when industries as aware, woke corporate citizens turn to resource efficient and energy efficient business models, which will help control air pollution. And how can they achieve this? They can do this by monitoring stack emissions as well as flue gases, by managing the effluents that they discharge, in doing health checks of their machinery, so the complete production processes that they have, by retrofitting and upgrading where that's needed, and also increasing the resource efficiency by upcycling as well as recycling. And all of this will eventually lead to them reducing their carbon footprints. And the payouts for these actions are going to be enormous. They're going to see it reflected directly in their bottom line. Kulsum already talked about environmental and social safeguards, as well as corporate social responsibility. And very importantly, as demand for clean green products grows, this will be reflected in their brand equity as well as their market share. Next, please. You would recall very famously in 2015, the global community signed the Paris Agreement, where there was a consensus that in order to avoid the catastrophic impacts of climate change, global warming would need to be limited to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. The bad news is that in 2020, we already reached 1.2 degrees centigrade. And this, of course, is an alarm that should be ringing for all of us, because this shows that the window for action is closing fast. This 0.3 degrees centigrade difference that we have, it would make a world of a difference in adapting to the effects of climate change, as well as building social as well as economic resilience. And businesses have a role to play in reducing emissions. They have a role to play in reducing air pollution for healthier, safer outcomes for all. Next, please. So we are in a race to zero, and this race to zero means that governments, industries, states, cities, regions all need to get involved in the effort to limit global warming. And this can be done by setting strategies that will take us to net zero by mid-century. So cleaner production and climate resilient business models are the way forward for Pakistani industry. The climate and environmental stewardship from business is critical, because as global market demand for cleaner products and clean service grows, businesses will need to demonstrate their climate credentials. More than anything, this pandemic has shown us the high cost of pollution as well as degradation. It is estimated that in 2021, the economic loss from COVID-19 is going to cross 1.1 trillion rupees. So by taking the Race to Zero pledge, businesses can demonstrate their commitment to reducing air and environmental pollution, as well as protecting the climate. Because no business can succeed in an ecosystem that is compromised. So business has to do what is good for planet, the people, as well as their profits. Next, please. As you know, the COP26 is coming up soon, and the UK is a co-president of COP26. And nature as well as air quality are one of the priority campaigns where the UK is trying to crowd in as many actors, governments and non-state actors alike, because we have only one planet, we have only one future, and good economics demands that we manage this better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sobia, for this presentation. I would actually ask you to remain available just for a few questions later on. I'd like to introduce two people who are actually, one is working in the corporate sector, representing Interloop Limited, Mr. Fazal Azim. He's the Deputy General Manager and Head of Corporate Sustainability and Chemicals at Interloop Limited. And Dawar Butt, a public and environmental policy analyst who is a contributing researcher for Pakistan at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. And he's also founder and organization for Climate Action Pakistan. So it's great to see the youth on board in this as well, Dawar. And he's worked with the corporate sector on improving air quality and, showing tips towards air quality. So I'm going to ask Dawar to explain a little bit about what he's doing and what can companies do to improve air quality.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Nazish. It's very nice to be joining such an esteemed panel. Before I start, there are a couple of photos that I would like to show, and I think if Anis can play them at the same time. What we see generally when we talk about Lahore in specific is that existing conditions or the limitations of sort of nature have been not really taken seriously. And what we see every year during the October to February period when the winter smog starts, we generally do not realize what we have left behind. So this was an image that was taken during the lockdown months of 2020, specifically, I think, early days of April. And this was when Lahore had a really good air quality. And just a couple of months before, in winter, when we have the smog season, we usually see very high levels of thick poisonous air. And at the same time, it's very low visibility, which means that your general day-to-day activities, particularly transportation, logistics, gets affected deeply. And again, logistics and transportation are usually seen as one of the key drivers of emissions because of the heavy use of certain dirty fuels. So this, in a sense, that is what I want to talk about specifically, that because when you say what businesses can do to make air quality better or be mitigating, there are a lot of things that they can do. But if we stick to specifics of what the Pakistani context requires, and a lot of research has shown that in most urban environments, transportation in Punjab, for example, causes 43% of the emissions. And similarly, in Karachi, you have nearly 50% of the emissions caused by transportation. So we know that transportation sector is one of the drivers. And the other component that I would really focus on is the industrial estates in multiple parts of the country, which specifically near urban sector. So we focused on example of Lahore a lot, but if we look at other cities, for example, our capital, Islamabad, and it basically happens to be sort of seen as a very green city, clean city. So the focus doesn't really extend to Islamabad. But there's also the sort of angle that Islamabad's traffic population and Islamabad's overall absolute human population does not match with, say, Lahore or Karachi. So it still has a decade or a couple of years before the pollution situation gets really bad. So if we switch to the next image, and I'll show you what our initial research is telling us. And this is particularly the Kashmir Highway or Srinagar Highway that we continuously use in Islamabad, and is one of the biggest transportation access points throughout the country because it's such a central thoroughfare. We realize that it is one of the biggest NO2 hotspots in the country. And this is largely because of the traffic that uses Islamabad Highway and the Srinagar Highway. And we see that the emissions, generally the city itself, particularly even the industrial states near the city, do not have such a high level of NO2 footprint as the transportation thoroughfares do. So this again, we realize that maybe we should be focusing on the fuel quality and logistics aspects of our sort of air quality, environment, climate nexus. Uh, Moving on, when we talk about what logistics can do, so in particular, in the past 4 or 5 years, the e-commerce sector in Pakistan has drastically improved a lot. It has, and there are multiple logistics companies opening up. A lot of them have expanded operations, but that also means that the fleets of these logistics companies have grown enormously. And particularly the last mile delivery angle usually means that a lot of traffic goes towards cities just to deliver certain parcels. In this sense, this is just talking about transportation sector, you have multiple businesses abroad who are now moving to shift their last mile deliveries to EV bikes and EV driven cars as well. Of course, the large heavy deliveries of logistics can't be really easily accommodated that way, but the last mile delivery where the transport accesses housing areas, where schools are present, where the human impact is higher as well, that is where the transportation sector has to sort of improve and move towards cleaner technologies. And since it's linked to your petroleum, the petroleum quality in itself, the country's petroleum quality standards have to be improved. We know that the petroleum division have now enacted notifications to use the Euro 5 standards for diesel and petrol. But of course, a lot of the petroleum which is refined within the country does not really match these standards. So in a sense, there's a lot that needs to be done to improve fuel quality. And as fuel quality improves, particularly the transportation sector, but we'll start seeing impacts here all over the place as well. While boilers use diesel or furnace oil, power sector uses furnace oil. A lot of the improvements in refining technology, investments, and this could be something that the public and private institutions collaborate on, because it's such a huge task to improve the refining and introduce new refining technologies into the country. Uh, since we're talking about sort of the use of fuel in industries as well, one of the key things that Pakistan still hasn't really jumped on board, sort of, is what India and China are doing in terms of emissions, emissions trading schemes within industrial states. So this is something I'm very keen to usually suggest to people who are managing environmental estates, especially to the public regulators, that when you talk about what businesses can do, you have to make it viable for them to be introducing those mitigation technologies. And in a sense, one of the key things that we can do is introduce the economic angle or the value of emissions they put out as a way to incentivize them to introduce technologies. You'd be very surprised to know that over the last year in Maharashtra, Gujarat, you had the introduction of an emissions trading scheme, which led to the reduction of 27% of emissions within the first year. And this was a comparison between the pilot study that they were doing, and now they want to replicate in the Indian Punjab, which of course faces the same smog as us. So this means that they have a model that they see that can help incentivize industries towards these moves. So I'd say that there's a lot of things that our industrial sector, our businesses can do, and particularly in cities like Islamabad and Lahore, Pindi, Faisalabad, these are the hotspots that we have, not just because of industrial activity, but because of certain environmental reasons as well. These are the areas that we need to start tackling, and it could be sort of collaboration between public and private sector actors, and also a sort of encouraging the new economies that we're building, especially in terms of e-commerce and logistics. And as cities expand, of course, their fleets have to expand. These are the targets that we have to aim at. We have to specifically pick businesses and sectors and try to mitigate the emissions within them. Of course, there's everyone has a responsibility, and as already suggested in the white paper, that an involuntary mechanism has to be put in place, so businesses start reporting on air quality emissions as well. But I would always recommend that there should be a direction that public-private sector have to take, and fuel quality angle, the transportation angle, and the power sector, industrial estates. This is where I would start, and this, in a sense, is the ultimate suggestion that what businesses and industries should be doing.
Thank you, Dower. I'd like to move over to Foz. Foz, can you tell us a little bit about how you're monitoring air quality and greenhouse gas emissions on at Interloop Limited? Sorry, Foz, you're mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Okay, Nazish, thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be on this session organized by SERB and representing Interloop. And of course, I'm happy to represent what good we are doing at Interloop from environmental perspective. So I would just want to relate the textile business with this emissions, because we are in a textile business, and of course we are dealing with the big brands and retailers. So it's a quite interesting relation when we say that in our textile products, we are very much sensitive about the use of hazardous chemicals. So because customers need that the textile we are making in, so it must not contain any hazardous chemical in it. And the sensitivity of those limits of the hazardous chemicals becomes more enhanced when we say that this textile product is in direct contact with the skin. So when we talk about the air quality, it's not in direct contact with the skin, it's in direct contact with the blood vessels. So we are just inhaling the air, and it's directly in contact with the blood vessels. So that's why I think the quality of the air is much more important, and we must focus it much more as compared we focus on the toxicity of the chemicals we are using in the textile. So in this way, so Interloop has a very ambitious targets since last 5 years, and we have made it more ambitious for the next 5 years to achieve. So for air quality, of course, we think that first thing to go, if you want to improve the air quality, that is the monitoring system. So we must have a very robust monitoring system to measure what we are discharging in the environment. So from 2015, Interloop started to set its 5 years targets, and the air emissions and the greenhouse gases and the energy consumptions, the fuel reductions, but these were the key areas which we are working since last 5 years. And of course, we have invested a lot on new technologies and renewable energies. So these are all the areas we are working in. So so the next thing, the important for us, that when we are monitoring all those things, and when we know that what actually we are releasing in the air, when we talk about the greenhouse gases. So the magnitude, of course, Interloop is a big company. It has a big operations as well. Of course, it's the fuel consumption is quite a lot. So keeping in view all those things, of course, we are monitoring all the emissions we are actually doing in the environment. So right now we have a very strong commitments at global level. We are part of United Nations Global Compact. We are part of Fashion Charter, United Nations Fashion Charter of Climate Change. We are part of science-based target as well, because Interloop has committed to achieve science-based target of 1.5 degree by 2030. So these are the things Interloop is closely working in when it regards to greenhouse gas emissions, as well as what out of the box we can do in this context.
Thank you, Foz. And have you made any investments related to air quality? Has Interloop Limited made any investments related to air quality in Faisalabad? Anas mentioned this at the beginning. I would like you to sort of tell us more about it.
Yeah, as I just discussed, that of course Interloop has invested a lot, not on only monitoring system, but also on how we can mitigate all these emissions we are currently emitting in the environment. So we installed air monitoring system at different locations and in Faisalabad. So it's more regarding to what is the condition of the environment within the city. But of course, that's a limited investment. The biggest investment we are doing in the renewable energy. So 5 years back, we planned to install a 4 megawatt installed solar capacity within the Interloop. Right now, we are exceeding this target. So approximately 6 megawatt installed capacity, solar capacity have already been commissioned within the Interloop. Similarly, we have huge investments on energy conservations. We have a huge investments on energy efficient technologies within the Interloop. So when we talk about the waste heat recovery, we are producing a huge quantity of you can say huge quantity of steam, which is almost free of cost, as well as with zero fuel. Similarly, we have a huge investments on energy efficient technologies, use of waste heat, efficient lighting system within the facilities, efficient washing technologies. Our e-flow technology is approximately reducing 70% of the energy we are using in conventional machines. So there is a huge amount of investment Interloop has done in last 5 years, specifically on energy reduction and the greenhouse gas emission reduction.
Okay, thank you, Fawz. It seems like a lot of Interloop is doing a lot of good work, and especially related to the air quality monitors. As you know, there is a famous saying that you can only start managing once you have the figures, once you measure. So I guess that's something that a lot of industries can do. Is to first we should get the data, and then we can identify the solutions to this. I'd like to come back to Sobia. Sobia, a number of aspects have been identified for improving air quality and initiatives the corporate sector can take. Davar mentioned transport and improving the fuel. Are there any areas that companies can invest to improve in their agricultural practices?
Thank you very much. Before I get to that, Nazish, I would like to congratulate Interloop and Fawz for being a part of the Race to Zero. And they've set some very ambitious targets, as Fawz referred to in his presentation just now. And I think that that's the sort of action that we need, and that we would also like to showcase both at national level as well as internationally. We have heard different ideas and different suggestions, and I also noticed a question in the chat bar from our colleague Ria Chinoy, who's listening in. The thing is that there's no standard that can be sufficient. So we have to arrive at standards that are appropriate as well as context specific, because during the course of the different presenters, the colleagues have mentioned a range of figures going as high as 60 parts per million in Sindh, for example, and lower. So I think the ideal here is to understand through voluntary monitoring, measurement, and reporting, as well as verification, establish voluntary data and standards. And once there's a healthy representative set of data that's available, then you move towards mandatory reporting. So I think that would be helpful. The second thing is that it's very important to break out of these policy silos that we have. And now I'm working towards the question that you just asked me, Nazish, and which is about agricultural waste and burning crop residue, which accounts for most of the pollution that Lahore and the neighboring country also experiences, and vice versa, because there are air sheds that are responsible for cross-border pollution. Now, I personally feel extremely bad for the farmers who have no other solution but to burn the crop residue. And this for me is a policy failure because they are not given enough time to clear the residue. They have no other choice but to burn it. And that, in fact, when you're burning it, you can think of them setting fire to rupee notes. Unfortunately, rupee notes that they do not have, because this is gold. This is biomass that can be used as a sustainable, renewable source of energy that they can use to power their processes. This is something that we are trying to showcase. The first thing that we're doing is that we're working with the artisanal brick manufacturing sector. We have a pilot in Lahore where we are training them in zigzag technology. And I know that zigzag technology is nothing new, but what is new about the work that we're doing is that we're training them to use this technology in the correct way to monitor stack and flue emissions and report back on it. And the next step of this initiative is going to be looking at biomass, establishing community-based facilities where this can be used, and developing the supply chain, which goes from farm to supplier who takes the energy pellets and then and their ability to access that. This is something that's very much on the cards. And when you think about the very high number of brick kilns, highly polluting brick kilns that we have in this country, when you think that at a global level, Pakistan has 3% of the global share of artisanal brick making, this is something this is incredibly important. What has been missing for me a little bit in this debate has been the concept of the just transition as far as air pollution is concerned, because we have to ensure that, as with other initiatives on energy transition and access to energy, then also poorer areas or less affluent neighborhoods, they also must have a just transition, which ensures that all of the polluting industry does not move out to that area, or that there are not enough checks and controls in such areas. So I think this would also be incredibly relevant. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sobia. I think your comments holistically brings a lot of the things that we've been discussing today together. So a lot of our discussion has identified areas where policies needs to be changed, and there's some discussion on the public-private interaction as well. For that, I'd like to invite Mr. Waqar Zakaria to speak a little about the Pakistan Action Plan for Air Quality. Mr. Waqar Zakaria is an eminent expert on energy and environmental management in Pakistan and has over 35 years of experience. And he's the current managing director of Hagler Bailey and is currently working on a project with ADB in relation to air quality. Mr. Waqar Zakaria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nazish. Can I are you going to run the presentation for me? That's fine. Let's do it that way.
Okay.
Just to start off a few comments. When we talk of air quality, we're talking of a public good. And when we talk of regulating, managing a public good, we cannot avoid working with the government, whether it is local, country, or whatever, or cross-border. So the government does come in, and Rafi and I have worked with government quite often. I know it's very frustrating, but there is really no alternative to engaging with the government and helping them form policies that will result in action. Just a few other comments. We've talked of monitoring of air quality as well as monitoring of emissions in the industry. I'm not making a statement about all the industry, but having been in this business, I've just put in a lot of caution. I would say practically 80 to 90% of the industrial monitoring, air quality or emissions monitoring that is being done. I'm hesitating to use the word bogus, but I will, because the instruments are outdated, not calibrated. There are no quality control checks. And in our business, we run into this every day. So a lot of caution when you're looking at, let's say, smart programs and what is being reported to EPAs. It's private companies going out there and providing services. Very few companies do their own. And that's a big problem area. So caution with the numbers when we say we monitor emissions. What does that mean? The other point I'd like to make about standards, again, having been involved in the 97 Act and when the environmental quality standards were set up, I would say the standards is not really much of a problem in this country. The problem is that the compliance is nowhere. So we can go on improving the standards, but if the standard is, say, 50, and we are emitting 150, you can raise that, you can improve that standard down to 30. But that's wouldn't really solve the problem. So the problem is really more with compliance. Our standards as they are not too bad, both for air emissions and air quality. Finally, the regulatory part of it, we need to differentiate between air emissions and air quality. The regulation of air quality is not really there. There are 2 points at which this regulation happens: at the environmental impact assessment stage, where the party makes the case doing air quality modeling that there is an air shed and there is an air quality, and when we come in, we will not incrementally do something that the air quality goes beyond the standards. And there's a lot of manipulation over there. There's a lot of bogus modeling that is done. And I know of very few cases in which the environmental protection agencies would not let an industry come about because the standard would not be met. And the air quality monitoring is also not emissions monitoring alone. The air quality monitoring is also the responsibility of industry, which to my knowledge, very, very few do. There's some exceptions in Thar where this is being done. So it's mostly left to emissions monitoring, and that alone is not compliance. If you're complying with emissions, on the other hand, the air quality that people are receiving because of the industry or other sources is not compliant, then there is a collective responsibility of all the emitters. So can I have the next slide, please? This Clean Air Plan was supported by an ongoing regional ADB technical assistance that is being offered to a number of countries. And the purpose of the plan is to look at policy, technical, and management-based measures to achieve whatever targets we agree upon. What I'm presenting to you is a very, very brief overview. Extensive research was done over the last about 6 months, and these 4 research or papers or reviewed notes. These were the basis of formulation of the policy, how bad the air quality is, how good the data that is available it is, how capable are the institutions, what options do we have, and what strategy we should have. we took all this to the draft strategy to the 5 provinces and AJK for discussions. We had a final discussion with Malik Amin Aslam, and there is one final interministerial discussion that is still to take place. Rafi was present when we took this discussion to Lahore, and we've invited, in addition to industry, various government departments, regulators, industry, and civil society as well. Next one, please. I will not go over these numbers. These have been discussed. The serious issue, we talk of externalities, are the health impacts, what people suffer and what they have to go through. And in case they're not treated, then what is the economic loss? And these numbers are staggering. Deaths, life expectancy, I believe Sobia mentioned closer to 3 years. So these are all extremely serious issues, and they're hurt all the economic sectors. Next one, please. How we went about setting up the plan. We have to have indicators, and we recommended USAQI. Punjab is looking at another set right now, and what we're recommending is, for the sake of uniformity and international comparisons, we stick to the USAQI methodology. So we have some issues in the country on this. What should we monitor? This has been discussed, only 2 or 3 parameters, and we're suggesting that we could start with just 2. The cost of monitoring goes up phenomenally if we start putting in other parameters like NOx, SOx, which are important, but this is where, let's say, most of the damage is. And then phasing of the plan, near term, 1 to 3 years. This typically coincides with a term of a political government. They'd like to see results or be able to show some results. So they're looking for high impact, low hanging fruit. Medium term, 4 to 10, and then the long term, 10 to 20 years. So certain investments require a lot of money. They cannot be done overnight. So these perspectives are very important in setting up priorities for what we do. The next one, please. Now, we had a lot of discussions, our own experts and other experts, what the menu that you see on the screen of 15 mitigations options. These are, we have a country perspective, so locally, as Kulsum also said, situations could be different. But largely speaking, what we are saying is with these 15, you should be able to handle about, let's say, 90% of the problem in the country. Some are heavy duties, others are lightweight, and some have more local impacts and others have more regional impacts. But this is a list that is certainly debatable. The methodologies that we are using for prioritization have an economic, technology, and a policy basis, and it's a transparent framework, and we can always add or remove options that the policymakers and the civil society stakeholders might want to look at. And you can see there are all the sectors, and I think we have, in my view, discussed all of these. The only one we have not talked about perhaps is the indoor air pollution, which affects mostly women in the rural areas that may not have access to clean energy. The next one, please. The prioritization methodology has, let's say, the approach is a multi-criteria analysis, and I think the economists and other business planners would have an idea of what this analysis is. You'd first define the criteria for how something is going to be prioritized. The general problem is in our system here, when the winter comes, and in Lahore, there is an immediately scramble for what can be done. And then the usual suspects are rounded up, and there is a screaming, and the crime goes on. And then there is the next season in which the air quality improves naturally and life goes back to normal. And the usual suspects typically are industry and brick kilns. And there's really no objective basis for this decision making. The criteria we looked at, these are 5: air pollution reduction or improvement in air quality is obvious, the one, that is what we're really trying to do. Economic costs and benefits. Costs, how much investments and benefits can be collateral benefits, for example, climate related benefits or pollution health related benefits. GHG reduction, this was a special request or input requirement, and it's a logical one that Sobhya has also discussed. It's a climate change and air quality go quite together. Social costs and benefits. The rickshaws and motorbikes are highly polluting. Do we lock them up? Do we throw them out of the streets? There will be their families that are being supported back there. And the same point made by Sobhya about agriculture. Should we tell the farmers you can't do this anymore? The poor guys will lose their livelihood. So that's a social cost as well. And there are social benefits. You remove solid waste from the streets, the landscape improves, the quality of life improves. And finally, institutional barriers and implementation. We're going to rely on command and control. Do we have EPAs that can give you command and control? If we don't have EPAs that can do it, there's no point in asking for compliance. So we have to be realistic about what instruments we have and what institutions can deliver. The next important point is source apportionment. Transport, industry, agriculture, there is very little data available, and obviously this will be a local problem. It will vary, but we used some numbers from the research. These were the best that we could get. Some work done in Karachi in industrial and non-industrial areas as a proxy with a judgment call. Now, in a policy matrix, we can always change the source apportionment and see which options are moving which way. But I think this point has been made. We mostly, our problem goes with the transport sector, the vehicle emissions, followed by industry, and then locally followed by municipal waste burning, agriculture, wind-blown dust. So these are the major ones. So we have the options, we have the criteria, we score the options against each criteria, giving them a score from 1 to 10. Then we apply the source apportionment on top of it to get a prioritization at the end to get a total weighted score. This is a, again, transparent algorithm-based thing, and the decision makers can change the weights as it's done in multi-criteria analysis. A caution that we did this with some of the provinces, changing some numbers here and there usually does not change the priorities very much because there's so many things to consider. The next one, please. All right, this, I will spare you a lot of detail, pages and pages of analysis that went behind this, but we have short, medium, and long-term ranking, and there are scores on the left side using the scoring criteria within, say, discussion in a room and rooms. And what comes out in the near term or short term is not the same that what comes out in medium and long term. And just give you an example. Vehicle emissions, 20% of the vehicles would be causing 80 to 90% of the problem. So when you chase the fuel quality, it is not necessarily going to get the results because the newer vehicles, the new fleet will not be a problem, and the old fleet is in such a shape that you can put in good quality of fuel in it, except for sulfur, the particulates, NOx, SOx, the problem may not go away. Industrial emission controls is coming in next. Again, it's a low-hanging fruit. We've been talking about it today. It's a very low marginal cost at times compared to cost of production. And I think here we need to be a little careful. We are mostly, when I talk of industry, I certainly do not have textile in mind. Textile is getting a subsidized clean fuel, natural gas at present, and they have international buyers to work with. Our real problems fall in, for example, steel industry, aggregate, crush machines, mining operations combined, brick kilns. So there's specific industries that are contributing a huge amount of pollution. Fuel standards is again a low-hanging fruit. It can be done quite easily through the refineries. Relocation of industries ranking next. Thinking that we'd be able to set them right is not going to work in the near term. There are huge economic issues. Industry lobbies are very powerful. So zoning is something. New industrial estates are being set up, open waste burning. Mass transit, if you look at it, electrical vehicles, which is the craze, which all my Reclaim Green Islamabad climate change friends talk about, is actually coming in 7th. You ain't going to get it done in 2 or 3 years. It's going to take a long time. However, if you look at medium and long term, mass transit and electric vehicles are the future. But putting all energy, you can do policy measures, you can set the stage for them. They're not going to give a near-term return. So on and on, you can go down the list and you can see how medium and long-term priorities change. Essentially, investments, infrastructure development time lags, and institutional capacity building time lags are what are separating the short, medium, and long term. The next one, please. The plan focuses on these 3 main areas: policy, planning, and regulation, working on capacity building, institutions, enforcement. We can't move away from it. At least it should, the stick should be there to show, even if it is not exercised. And then whole sort of management issues, solid waste, for example, traffic management, vehicle inspections. These are mostly management. They're not really technology issues as such. A Clean Air Secretariat is recommended for Ministry of Climate Change to follow up on this process. It's not going to be done by this or that additional secretary or a deputy secretary. We need a institution that follows it up. The next one, please. And finally, the thrust, and this is what I discussed with the special advisor, is to go towards promoting investment and funding. And that's where the private sector primarily comes in. A compliance-based approach, working with improving the standard, chasing the EPAs is not really going to get us much of anywhere. We have to see how we can provide incentives and promote investments. And the government can provide a policy and framework incentives, but the action, e-vehicle investments, the private sector can do measurements. Mass transit is largely in Karachi being run by private sector. Should we really be moving government into it, or should we attract private capital for it? These are the major policy frameworks that the government has to look at, and the thrust will be to set up incentives for investment. The Clean Air Secretariat has to hold the policy, follow it through, and that would mean working with finance, industries, board of investments. It's climate change, environment runs across all the ministries and all the sectors. It's not something that we can leave with EPAs alone. Investments, e-vehicles, obvious ones. I believe Toyota is announcing $100 million investment for hybrids. I believe it's the Mitsubishi plant in Faisalabad, long-term plans for, or near-term plans for manufacturing e-vehicles in the country. Also, we have, sorry, I need to shut up. Sorry about that. Investments in refining, emission controls, setting up new industrial zones. Some of these things are already happening. We need to push there more. Some of these things are being thought about. We need to move faster. Mass transit, it's one or two routes or rapid bus transits are not going to get the job done. We're talking of railways, we're talking of commercial operation of railways, we're talking about private sector in highways, urban mass transit systems, services and management, again, vehicle inspection, traffic management, urban waste management. There are opportunities for private sector everywhere. The Ministry of Climate Change is already talking to ADB, have made a request to ADB and others to say, start on a pilot basis, set up vehicle inspection systems in the cities and e-vehicle charging stations to support the market. These are somewhat the ones that are starting off. Other things that the ministry would like to push: industrial estates, centralizing, moving the industries out of the urban areas, and mass transit, as well as commercialization of railways to support mass transit. So there are a range of actions. There is a broad understanding in the Ministry of Climate Change on the prioritization. That has been sort of accepted, but the provinces have asked for a lot of help, that they want to develop or look at their own priorities and develop their own programs using these methodologies. And we're also talking about investments in monitoring of air quality capacities and so forth. So Nazish, with that, I would end my discussion. So over to you.
Thank you, Waqar Saab, for the input from your side, telling us details about the plan and how to move forward. I just, since we're in the interest of time, I just have one question which I will pose to Dr. Kulsoom, and then I will hand it over to Mr. Ehsan Malik for the closing. Dr. Kulsoom, a number of comments today have highlighted about the costly nature of upgrade to individual industrial plants. How can industries work together to sort of suggest solutions that will improve air quality and make it easier for them all to sort of move towards this agenda?
Thank you, Nazish. I just want to first thank everybody, because this has been a really interesting discussion. And I also want to particularly thank the participants for some of the questions and comments that have come. I was thinking about what is it at the level of the private sector? What can companies do in the context of opening up export markets, in the context of attracting ESG financing, etc.? And actually, it strikes me that it's actually surprisingly, actually, it's quite a large list. The first is just working with communities, much as Interloop are doing, as Foz pointed out, putting a network of monitors in Faisalabad. So just understanding what is the effect on air quality. A company can help with that in their local community. The second is, as Riaz Chinoy pointed out in his comments, the importance of an environmental management system. This is within a company, so that within a company, one can understand what are the priorities. Is air quality, or is a company affecting air quality? And how can it then put a system of continuous improvement to get there, to actually improve ultimately the air quality, but its own emissions. In the same way, large companies can work with smaller suppliers. As Mustafa Ahmed points out, it's expensive for SMEs. So how can the larger companies work with their suppliers, so down the supply chain, in terms of helping them understand? Because sometimes large companies have resources and also an understanding of what's needed, which sometimes the expertise is not there with smaller companies. So how can that happen? And then this discussion that Waqar just put forward in terms of at a country level, there is an action plan. Clearly, companies can work, and there's a need for investment. It's private investment. Those are all private initiatives, whether it's the parks that need to be set up, or whether it's the mass transit, or the area, stations for electric vehicle charging. That's all the private sector. So there is all of that. But then finally, I actually think there is one other thing, which is how companies can work with the government to work on things upstream, such as better fuel, access to better fuel sources, which then benefits everybody, as opposed to, just one sector or one company. So I think there actually is a whole host of ways. And I think that's where we need to come back to, is what can companies do in order to make a difference, as Shahid Amjad pointed out, not just in letter, but in spirit, in terms of doing something about air quality. Over to Ehsan, but a very interesting discussion. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Ehsan sir, just a minute, if everybody, all the panelists could turn their cameras on, so we could have a small picture, and then I'll hand it over.
Okay, so whilst everybody gets the cameras on, I want to start by thanking the entire panel. The entire panel. The quality of the contribution today, I think, exceeded most of the webcasts that I've attended on this subject. I've certainly have learned a lot, and I'm sure the participants would have done so too. I just wanted to put a little bit of what we do in the mainstream of Pakistan Business Council into the context of what SERB, which is very much part of Pakistan Business Council, is trying to do. So Pakistan Business Council is a business advocacy body. We try and take sensible policies to the government of Pakistan, working often through multilaterals, but mostly directly. And what we're trying to do is to create the basis of sustainable growth for business and for the country. We realized, we started off in 2005, and today, mashallah, we've got over 90 of the leading corporates that have the highest investment in the country, both multinational as well as local companies. But about 5 years ago, which was about 10 years since we established the council, we realized that actually just speaking to the government of Pakistan and trying to get your fiscal policies and your trade policies and your energy policies, everything that affects the top line and the bottom line is not going to be enough. We need to go beyond that and to stretch ourselves into sharing some of the good practices that our members are doing, but not necessarily our members, because they are not perfect either. But what's happening, world class, and try and bring that to the country. So that's where we started off, and that's how SERB came about. Now, when we engage with the government of Pakistan on things like the fiscal policy or the trade policy, etc., there are a few things that we encounter which are directly relevant to what we are trying to do in the environmental space. First of all, I think something that starkly stands out is fragmentation. There's fragmentation between the federal government and the provinces. There's fragmentation and silo-centric policies within the federal government. So finance is, for example, all about raising revenue. Commerce is all about trying to promote exports or trying to minimize imports. Climate change, of course, is trying to just manage climate change. But there is nobody trying to bring it all together and trying to make sense. So let me give you an example. We, in this particular budget, when the budget discussion was going on, we went to the government of Pakistan and we said, fine, you've withdrawn lots of tax exemptions, but there is one tax exemption, or not an exemption, but an incentive that we would dearly like you to consider, is to incentivize collection of garbage, and to also incentivize the recycling and also emission control. And whilst we've got lots of nods in terms of agreement with the rationale for that, unfortunately, it did not translate into real action. Yeah. So this is a manifestation of short-termism that comes into the policy framework. As somebody pointed out, a lot of the decision making is done and changes with the governments that come in. It changes often also with who's in charge of the ministry, and sometimes with the change of secretaries. So there isn't a longer term view taken, and often it is constrained by short-term needs, to meet your revenue considerations or others. I think the other thing that we encounter a lot is the size of the informal sector. As you know, the informal sector is large in Pakistan, and informal sector is not it's not accountable to anyone, and it's very difficult to hold them accountable. This is not to say that the formal sector is compliant in every way that they could potentially be compliant, but informal sector is unaccountable. Yeah. And nobody actually today even knows, State Bank of Pakistan doesn't know, the Ministry of Finance doesn't know, Ministry of Economic Affairs doesn't know what is the size of the informal sector. It is really vast. To try and get them to conform is, I think, something that's going to take a while. So really we end up focusing with the few that either are forced to comply or would like to comply. So Interloo, for example, is one that would like to comply, but there are lots of others that have to comply because they supply or their customers are demanding. But that's good. I mean, at least the end result is good. I think a point was made about trying to reach the sky when you don't even know how to take off. And if you, I think we need to have both. I mean, when we go to the government of Pakistan, we articulate policies to try and broaden the tax base. We don't say go and catch everyone today or tomorrow that doesn't pay tax. You've got to have policies that would gradually get people into the tax base. I think the same thing needs to happen in every aspect of compliance, whether it is in the environmental space or other spaces. Logistics. I think a point very validly made, causes a lot of pollution, but it not only causes a lot of pollution. Pakistan has one of the most expensive and the least efficient logistics setup, and railways is probably the best solution. But where is it in terms of, even if you look at from the context of CPEC investment, railways has taken a back seat. What have we done? We made roads. Yeah, who goes on roads? It is polluted vehicles that go on roads. Not to say that we didn't need the roads. We need the roads. We need the bridges, etc. And of course, we also needed energy. But hey, what did we do on energy? We ended up setting coal plants. So again, it is something that is missing in our policy framework, where the Ministry of Planning has taken a back seat, and the Ministry of Finance has now taken the front seat, and everything is being driven by that. So it's this shorter term revenue considerations. What is easy? What can be accomplished very quickly? And then we end up misincentivizing. So I don't want to go on. We I think have spent more than an hour and a half. I don't want to text the audience, and I want to really thank the panel. Starting with Dr. Kulsum Ahmed, because she claims that she woke up at normal time, but I know that we started at 8 o'clock Washington time. And Ahmed Rafi, Dr. Sobia Becca, I think Race to Zero is something that we all need to join in. Dava Bhatt, I think very valid points on logistics and transportation. Bakar Zakaria, and of course, Foz from Interloo. So everybody, thank you very much. And thank you also for the participants. I was looking at the number of participants, and that's kept hovering between 30 and 35. You people have a lot of stamina, and I think we need all the stamina and all the power to take this agenda forward. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to the two of you and congratulations.
Yes,
I wanted to
it
say
went.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It went quite well. We were just a little over time, but at least we had the interest of everybody.
No, but that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you did, and actually you had some people participate who I think don't normally, like Riaz, you know, he's a CEO of international industries, and now Yaqeen Steel. So, you know, I think you did well that way too. But I'll be there, Nazish, in October, and
Okay.
we'll have a chat.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
I look forward to meeting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nas then.